excited to introduce our two distinguished speakers this morning, Rabbi Michael Howald and Ghanim Khalil, but I have to put on my video so you can do this. And speak into the mic. Can you hear me now? Yes. Unfortunately, I can't see. I'm hiding behind the mic. Okay. I first met Rabbi Howald right here at the UCSI. He is the rabbi of the Temple Israel Reform Congregation, and he was a panelist at an Abraham's Table event sponsored by the Turkish Center at our church. He calls himself a second career rabbi. His first career was in the practice of law. He graduated from Stanford University in 1979 and Stanford Law School in 1982. Before entering Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religions in 2001, he practiced law for 19 years in Los Angeles. In 2000, he reassessed his goals in life, and he decided to pursue a more spiritual path. He felt he could contribute more to his community as a rabbi than as a lawyer. Before coming to Temple Israel, he was the rabbi of Temple Bethel in Salinas, California. Among some of his duties at Temple Israel are teaching, developing adult education programs, directing the children's religious school program, spiritual counseling, working with youth, conversions, consecrations, weddings, and leading worship services. Our other speaker, Ghanim Khalil, is an American citizen of Pakistani descent. I met him in late 2002 or 2003 at a planning meeting with a core group of anti-war activists who were then forming the Staten Island chapter of Peace Action. He was finishing his military career he was finishing his military enlistment in the Army National Guard following 4 years in the Marine Corps. He was struggling with his decision to refuse deployment to Iraq. At the time, he said, "As a Muslim, I have objections to this war. Muslim tenets forbid taking a life except in self-defense." He is also a scholar of Islam. He has participated in facilitating interfaith dialogue in a series of roundtable discussions with representatives of each of the three Abrahamic religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. He began his work 8 years ago at the College of Staten Island with the Catholic nun, Sister Elaine Shank. So this morning, we three representatives of Islam, Judaism, and Unitarian Universalism, religious traditions that do not profess dogma, but that do present an ethical summons to practice compassion, we hope to open the door to a continuing dialogue on the misunderstandings and the ignorance that give rise to prejudice, hateful speech, and hateful actions. We have seen the rise of nationalist groups both here and abroad that target Muslims as undesirable others and as representatives of radical Islam, along with a corresponding surge in anti-Semitism, both here and abroad. It would seem that there are some parallels in the hate directed at both Muslims and Jews in the world today. Hatred that relies upon stereotyping vast numbers of ordinary people based upon broadly drawn caricatures. Take Shylock, for example. Jews have long been maligned as greedy and avaricious based upon the depiction of Shakespeare's revengeful moneylender. Or take the term for people from the Middle East or the Indian subcontinent, Wab. Derived from British colonialism, it means wily Oriental gentleman, a term of derision that casts the brown person as the treacherous, untrustworthy other. And so, I turn to our speakers to share their knowledge about the roots of these vexing problems. So, Rabbi Howald, how old is anti-Semitism, and does it predate Shylock in the Elizabethan time?
Can everybody come out? I guess everybody can hear me. Anti-Semitism goes back much, much farther than Elizabethan England. It has very ancient roots. We have a number of Roman authors who spoke about Jews and Judaism as perverse and disgusting, in part because they viewed the Jews of their time as caring only about themselves and being very clannish. And some of the ancient writers did not understand this idea of a day of rest, particularly a day of rest even for slaves. There certainly was a lot of ancient Christian anti-Semitism as well. If any of you have read Matthew and John, and if you read the works of St. Augustine, who referred to the Jews as a symbol of what happens to people who won't accept Jesus as the Savior. And he said, we should kill them because they are despised and carnal, but we won't. We'll preserve them as a people, as a sign to all those who might doubt what happens to those who don't profess what he viewed as the true faith. So yes, it is very ancient roots that go back much, much farther.
Khalil, can you tell us something about Orientalism, that view of brown people from the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent as the untrustworthy other?
First, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I'm also a part-time comedian, and I've been in several movies. You might know a couple of them. One of them was The Man Who Fell Down the Times Square Stairs. Has anybody ever heard of that? What about the student who took the wrong bus to the university? I played leading roles in those two movies. Actually, those are real events. I'm sorry. Get it? They were real events. The term she used, Orientalism, dates back academically to the 18th and 19th century. European scholarship, when they wanted to describe the people that they were colonizing, what they were like. So what they did was they labeled them with essential traits like lazy, barbaric, evil, violent, prone to violence, backward. Same things that they would label Jews. So that, as an academic exercise, filtered throughout European society. And a lot of American scholarship also took on some of those points. So Orientalism is like a negative way of viewing the other in relation to the self. So you're civilized, you're scientific thinking, you're rational. The other is the opposite of all those things. And that's what a lot of the coverage today seems like. So, for example, we don't blame the violence on current conditions that the people are going through currently. Their political, economic, military conditions. We tend to reduce the problems to culture. So they're violent because they're culture, because of their inherent biological, ideological characteristics. So that's problematic. You can see how racism, becomes involved in that type of thinking, and taking over people's land, certain types of foreign policies and military policies that would be objectionable if we're done here, but aren't objectionable if we do it to the other, because the other deserves it. This is the only way we can deal with the other. So Orientalism is a field of knowledge to explain our relationship to the other. And it's supposed to be negative things, and that's what we want to reverse when we do activities like this.
Thank you. So, about Jews and Muslims, if they are other and not like us, then the question for us is, who is us? So, what role would it be anybody who isn't Jewish or Muslim? And what role do you think the Christian identity movement plays in this? Should I make a note about the Christian identity movement, just in case we're unclear? Yes? Okay. Christian identity is a movement of many extremely conservative Christian churches and religious organizations, extreme right political groups, and survival groups. The racist and anti-Semitic theology has been called the glue of the racist right. So, as with institutional racism, do these ignorant and bigoted ideas creep into the public consciousness and affect the way Jews and Muslims are seen? Your thoughts?
The Christian identity movement, also called identity Christianity, what it does is it reduces human beings that aren't white to their racial substance. So, in other words, the real descendants of everybody good in the Bible was white, and they represent virtue. So there's racialistic understandings of the world, and so that doesn't really leave Jews, Muslims of different backgrounds, and even brown Christians in other places in a very positive light. It creates a dichotomy. A dichotomy is a sense of reality divided into two. So there's us and there's them, and because we're good, the others represent the opposite of good. So it creates a false dichotomy in order to explain the world and why it is the way it is, except Christian identity gives it a religious flavor. So whenever you look into the Bible and you read the Bible, you give it a racialized sense of understanding, a racial interpretation of biblical literature. That's very bad today because we're trying to still overcome some of the racial tensions we have in the United States today. So what they do is they make racial issues front and center, when really we know scientifically and we know intellectually we're all equal, we're all human beings, we're all born with the same, our societies have the same vices and virtues. So reducing reality to a racialistic perspective demonizes Jews, it demonizes Muslims, it demonizes Christians who aren't of your color, basically.
When I first got that question, I have to say I had not heard of identity Christianity. I share in Ghanim's comments about this false dichotomy between one type of person and another. As I read at least the Hebrew Bible, I don't think it has very much to say about race relations. It doesn't talk about white or black or any other shade. It talks about people as people or groups as part of tribes, but it doesn't speak about people in the way that we think about it. We project, I think, people today are projecting backward into time a racial sensibility that I really am not sure existed among our ancient ancestors, and therefore it is not as inevitable as they say. When it comes down to this question of us versus them, I'm reminded there was a bombing in Paris in 1980 of a synagogue, and several people in the synagogue were killed, and then 2 people who were walking by the synagogue were also killed. And the president of France, his name was Raymond Barre, came out and he said, they struck at the Jews, but instead they killed innocent Frenchmen. And that way of thinking, it's so there's the Jews and there's the Muslims, and then us, we're innocents, right? We're innocents to the conflict between them, and we would prefer they not be with us. Mm-hmm. So when you think about that kind of thinking, right? The people who think about us versus them, it's always, I forgive any evil among us. Among them, it's endemic, right? We're the innocents, they're the guilty. So that's how I think about those kinds of things.
Thank you. So, then what did each one of you say in sort of this strange prism through which we view Jews and Muslims? What did each one of you say about the tendency of those outside of your own religions to view your beliefs? And I'm thinking in terms of the way people are thinking of ISIS. ISIS represents Islam. So, what about people who, outside of your own religions, who view your beliefs as monolithic and rigid? Is there a different way to interpret the teachings? Are there many ways to interpret the teachings, both in Judaism and in Islam, the teachings of the Quran and of the Torah? So.
I live in a world where that goes without saying. As a Reform rabbi in a Reform congregation, the Jewish world that I occupy is one in which Reform Judaism is viewed as illegitimate in some corners of our community, or tolerated, sometimes accepted. But our interpretations of scriptures are not always accepted. And if you think about, here where there's approximately maybe 14 to 16 million Jews in the world. Some of them are Orthodox, some of them are conservative, other different branches. Most of them are not affiliated with any religion. And it's hard to think of any issue about which Jews agree. And Jews certainly don't agree about a fundamental issue of Israel. And today, and how to achieve peace there. And if you read the news today, I mean, as I came in here today, I stopped to get a Diet Coke, as I always do, at a local store. And CNN was running a story that said, how can Jewish Democrats support President Obama? And as if somehow that would be illegitimate, as if the monolithic Jewish people of the United States could only think one way about our approach, the approach of this country to Israel, and that's just not true. There's a remarkable diversity, and the only thing I'd say, how do we combat that? It's up to you. If you just read the newspaper, the New York Times, over the course of a week, you will see a broad variety of opinion in our community about what to do.
I think that's the problem with reducing people to characters, because we're not movie characters, even though I'm an actor. We're not movie characters. We can't be reduced to a dozen or so vices or virtues. So we're left with characters that represent what is not us. So it makes sense to me that people would say that, things about Jews like that, reducing them to one, type of character or personality. In Islam, there's multiple interpretations of Islam. However, you have to be an expert in the interpretive fields. For example, if you interpret the Quran, you have to be an expert of the Quran. If you interpret the sayings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, which we call hadith, the hadith literature, you have to be an expert of how to interpret those things. So we recognize, in Islam, in Islamic scholarship, we recognize expertise. So the experts are the ones who interpret the scriptures. The layman, to his degree, to his intellectual capacity, follows whoever the scholars he follows. So there's a multiplicity within a unity. So the core of Islam is always the same, has been the same throughout centuries, but on the peripheral aspects of Islam, there's a diversity and difference which enriches Islam. And then there are interpretations which we cannot accept because they contradict the basic principles of the Islamic message. So you mentioned ISIS, Ruth mentioned ISIS. ISIS does a number of things which the overwhelming majority, more than 99.9% of the Muslim scholars, experts of the religion, say that violates really core, strong principles of the Islamic belief system. And that's a huge consensus. That usually does not happen. People always disagree over things. But ISIS is a type of movement which politically, economically, and militarily has done things which have been have violated sacred Islamic principles for a long time. That's difficult for non-Muslims to understand because non-Muslims say, well, why do they call themselves the Islamic State? Well, that's very simple to explain because when we go into labels, we label ourselves. We demonize ourselves when we label ourselves certain things. We demonize others when we label other people other things. Labels are just terms. That's terminology. When you dig past the terminology and look at actions, people's actions, what they've said, what they've done, that's how we can articulate a proper understanding of other people through their actions, their speech. Through the actions and speech of ISIS, we can determine from a scholarly academic point of view and from a popular cultural perspective that they've departed from the Islamic religion. They use religion as an ideology to achieve certain political, military, and economic objectives. And it's unfortunate that already in the United States, people don't really know too much about Islam. So Muslims have a lot of work to do to bring that understanding to them. But that's what creates the deficiency or the ability of the people to really, when they see ISIS, to connect that with Islam. It makes it easier to be a part of the demonization process, even though I believe the overwhelming majority of Americans are good, intelligent people. And if they knew more about Islam, if Muslims did more to spread the real teachings of Islam, that wouldn't happen. So generally, Americans are good people.
Well, you certainly anticipated my next question with that because it all blended together very nicely. So I think in that case, we'll just move on to a sort of a general question that we all can consider and hopefully participate in. And that is in our own congregations, in our communities. What is the way forward? What is it that we need to do to break down this understanding of Muslims and Jews and of Muslims and Jews as people who are in opposition to each other? That's kind of an interesting question too. So, that's a challenge. What do you think?
There's a great book, I think it's actually a book that's assigned in an MBA program, but it's called Leadership Without Easy Answers. And this is one of those questions to which I'm not sure that there's an easy answer. Events like this are great. I'll say that before I came to Staten Island, I had never been in a mosque. I'd never, of course, I hadn't been a rabbi most of my adult life, but I hadn't been in forums speaking with Muslims about Muslim issues. I had never even opened the Quran. And now since I've been to Staten Island, I've done all of those things. I felt I can't just rely upon people in the Muslim community to educate me about Islam, because there's so much out there for me to know and to find, and it's freely available. The one thing I would say, the leader of our movement, President Jacob, spoke yesterday at the J Street meeting. And he said something that I thought was important. He quoted Yehuda Amichai as talking about the place where we are certain we are right is a place where no flowers will grow. And the place where doubt and love exists, that is the place where the land is plowed. And so it seems to me that those where we understand we may not be right, we can at least give people who disagree with us a hearing. And to acknowledge, too, that we may find a way of brotherhood and sisterhood and love between the two of us, even though we might disagree on a variety of other issues that we hold dear.
This is a very complex issue. I'm going to try to be short. I tend to carry on. But in the Quran, there's a concept called fitra. Fitra is the essence of the human soul, which every human has. The fitra is where your virtues come from. The fitra is like a mirror that reflects the godly characteristics you're supposed to have as a human being. So fitra is what makes you human, basically. And everybody has fitra. Every human being has fitra, is born with fitra. However, when we grow up, we either are going to reflect the fitra through good action and virtues, or we're going to conceal our inner nature. Inner nature is another word for fitra. We're going to conceal our inner nature by doing things that we're not supposed to do, or evil things, or bad things, and that conceals our inner being. When it comes to reflecting on and expressing fitra according to the Quranic principles, we have to see each other as human beings first. So I can't really look at this gentleman to my left and say, he's a Jew. I mean, that's not the way it starts. He's a human being, and he was born with fitra. So I have to deal with him according to what's his essence, his fitra, his godly nature. So we have to deal with human beings first, each other in human ways. Then we can comment on his actions, his virtues, his vices, which, by the way, we all have. So, in other words, being humble, recognizing that other people's flaws are your flaws, and your virtues are also other people's virtues, puts everything on an equal playing field. When everything's equal like that, doubt, that's when doubt comes into play. It's interesting you mentioned doubt. Imam Ghazali, may Allah have mercy on him, he was the Moses Maimonides of the Islamic history of scholarship. So he's a towering figure. He said doubt plays a key and crucial role in the intellectual system, in the human intellectual system, beyond Islam. So doubt is very key, and doubt is what keeps you humble, and doubt is what creates empathy for the other. And so if we do things together in an empathetic way, recognizing the humanity in each other, those evil thoughts about discriminating against people, judging people, reducing them to characteristics, as I was saying earlier, they don't even come into your mind. And your heart stays on the same track, on the track to treat each other in a human way. And so we do apply Quranic principles, and I should say, I've been studying Judaism for a long time. And there are things in the Torah that when I read, I'm like, wow, that's Islamic. That's Islamic. That's what we believe. And that bond is very important to recognize. We call them people of the book. That's been misinterpreted in modern language today. But people of the book are people who share your principles and values. So that's how I start acknowledging.
Great. I want to thank you both very much. And we're going to open this now to questions and answers from the congregation, I guess. And I'm going to commandeer that microphone from you, Rabbi, and you and you can share. So,
If anybody has anything they would like to ask, okay, here I come.
I'd like to know if either of you have heard of Dr. Manasa Freedy. There was an article in the Times about her maybe just a few days ago. She's a professor of religion at Manhattan College, and she's a practicing Muslim and Holocaust scholar. So it seemed like that seems like a good place to start for Rich.
Well, I'll just say I'm not familiar with her work, but I'm very encouraged by hearing about it. I'm a voracious reader. Every morning I'm up, I'm reading my Twitter account, and, which I love. I love getting tweets. I don't actually send them, in part because I don't really know how. But that kind of stuff would be great to read. As I said, that lifts my spirits just to hear about it.
I haven't heard of her either, but she seems interesting. If you could get me her information.
I'll send you a link to the Times article.
Okay, excellent. Whenever I think about the Holocaust, I think about the story. It's in the Quran and it's in the literature of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he talks about people in a nation civilization who were gathered together because they believed a certain way. They were thrown into a fire pit, and the lesson of the story is to see, look, this is how, this is what happens when you don't follow guidance. People become evil to each other. And so when I think about the Holocaust, I think about that. And there's a huge religious connection between Islamic belief and what happened to the Jews. For my history class, talking about historiography, which is an important class in college, we talked about the Holocaust. And that's when I truly, deeply understood how horrible of a situation that was. And the Holocaust just wasn't a series of few events that spanned a few years. It dated back, way back, in the previous century, the demonization process I'm talking about. And then it culminated in the Holocaust. So I think that's very interesting that she, as a Muslim female, as a Muslim woman, that's her expertise.
Hi, my name is Dave Jones. I had dinner, my wife and myself had dinner at a friend's house in Brooklyn a few nights ago. And I was struck by a poster she found at an antique shop in Israel, in her visit to Israel. And this poster was a picture, it was just a travel advertisement. It said, "Come to Palestine." And the entire picture, the picture was the picture of what is now called Israel. And at the time, later during some of our discussions, it turns out that in 1930 was when this poster was placed there. This poster came into being. And there was an active tourist trade, and it was promoted as Palestine. Now, it had, I felt good about immediately about the poster. It spoke to me, but I was shocked by the amount of land that's no longer considered Palestine. So, what is my question? I guess that is my question.
I read a book by an Israeli historian. His name is Benjamin Beit Halami. He critiques Zionism, and in his critique in the beginning, he shows you how it really doesn't have anything to do with race, or some of the other ways we characterize Zionism, or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And he mentions that point, the point of terminology, how terminologies change and shift according to power structures and politics. And so what I would say about that is there is an interesting history there. And people should become familiar with that history, where names of places have been changed in recent history. that erased the previous history or community or culture there. And that could be used as an example of how you have a situation where you can use your virtues and values to discover the humanity in the other. But by just looking at a poster and stuff like that. But this whole issue is has baggage, has political, economic, cultural baggage in it that I can't possibly address here in reaction to that. But I would just say, sticking to my earlier principles of seeing the humanity in the other is the best way to approach even the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Because I have to stick to my Islamic principles. And so that's the lens which I use to look at conflict management, which is a book I'm reading right now about the Islamic perspective of conflict management. And I'm learning from this book a lot of things. But that's the way I choose to look at it, from a human point of view like that. But that is interesting.
The names of the entities that exist there is so fraught with meaning today. Everybody on every side of this issue is very careful in how they refer to these regions and the people living there. The names have obviously taken on a meta-significance in people's minds, and there's no way. I mean, when you first asked the question, I thought, wow, that is such a large question. There's no way to answer it in any simple way. I mean, Zionism really started as an idea of how to address what was called then the Jewish problem, which is that how does this stateless people who have no power over their own polity, how do they find a homeland in which they can have some control over their own lives without living on the sufferance of other people? And so that really was the problem that Zionism was meant to address. I consider myself a Zionist. I'm deeply pained by the situation that exists there today. I do believe in the two-state solution, so there would be a dream come true for there to be two states side by side, one Israel and one Palestine. I'm hoping that will happen in my lifetime, though as I watch the news, I would have to say I'm a relentless optimist. So whether it will happen in my lifetime or not, but I believe that is essential, not just because it carries forward my Jewish values, but because I believe it is essential for Israel's own security.
I have two questions. Louis has one, and then Carol had one.
So, as I would agree to say, we need to stop ISIS immediately. Now, I heard a few weeks ago, some, I think Louisiana woman was captured by ISIS in 2013, and he just executed her. We have to make sure no Staten Islander is captured by ISIS. We should end it. We should have a march. We should end this. And make the world peaceful.
Let me just say something. If you watch CNN, you would think ISIS is in every nook and cranny, hiding under every pillow. But they're not. And the one thing about, I would say, there's no logical reason necessarily that this would be relevant to our discussion today. But let me just say this. Yesterday there was an attack at an airport with a guy with a machete. I hear he was a Christian Scientist. So nobody's calling upon the Christian scientists across the world to denounce this act of violence. Right? Nobody's calling upon them to say, well, all Christian scientists are now tainted by this act of violence. They must denounce it, or else they're not living according to the rules of their faith. He's crazy, they would say. So when it comes to ISIS and these kinds of groups, the world has seen many despotic groups that have arisen, Christian groups. There have been in the past even Jewish groups, and Muslim groups. To say that what ties them all together is that wherever there are Muslims, there will be ISIS is ridiculous, irrational. And all we can do, really, I think, is to try to educate people. First of all, don't watch CNN all the time. You'll never get to sleep, right? You'll never get to sleep if you watch it all the time. But also educate yourself about it. You know, really, what is the extent of their power? Where are they existent? What gives, and the more that you know about them, the more they seem like other organizations and groups that have existed in the past, and they're not this specter that will haunt you in your dreams.
Hello, my name is Howald. Also, this church is liaison for the Building Bridges Coalition of Staten Island, so I applaud this. But in all honesty, as informative as it is, you're kind of preaching to the choir. So my question is, do you have a way to reach young people? Because I think that's where we need to reach out to young people. It's a little hard to change the mindset of an adult sometimes, but with a young person, you can open their mind a little bit and make them think. You know, so I guess that's my question.
We have to teach our own youngsters first through our own example. That's where it begins. And then we can reach out to other organizations that address youth in particular. But I would also include college students over 18, people over 18, but they're still young. The reason why I say that is because college is the environment where whatever you were taught before college crystallizes. And then it's embedded with whatever new things they learn afterwards, or during college. So I always start with our own youth first, and then concentrate on connecting our youth, what we teach our youth, to youth in other community. And that can be done in multiple ways, with building bridges and this event here. There's a few youngsters here, and other organizations and events that we could speak to. Speak to in a way that they would understand.
Yeah, just a shout, I have my confirmation group here. My 14 and 15-year-old. You don't have to stand up and introduce yourself. Your rabbi won't do that to you. But they are here. I'm ambivalent sometimes about going into forums where I can't anticipate what the questions will be. Particularly since there's such a possibility for there to be anger and for it not to be productive. I've kind of convinced myself that I have to do it. I know when I used to teach when I was in Salinas, I'd go to high schools and teach a section about Judaism. And the teachers would say, just teach the material, don't ask any questions. But I would always ask questions, and I'd always say, so what do you guys know about the Jews? And inevitably, somebody would raise their hand and say, you killed Jesus. And so that conversation, right, that conversation is not always an easy conversation. But with young people, because they're so honest, it can be very rewarding to have those kinds of conversations. I would just say this, is that there's a personal cost that comes with the people that are spokespeople for this, in the sense that, we both kind of like prepared, and maybe we even clenched a little bit before we got here. We were both looking through our notes as we were going to come up here, because we wanted to be prepared. We wanted to be good representatives of our beliefs. And so sometimes the freedom, I think, the freedom that I think that we have in this country, sometimes there's a freedom in just being anonymous, and not feeling like my back has to be the bridge in every situation that unites people. But as a rabbi, I feel called upon to do it more than I would if I was just an attorney, right? So I don't know where the mix is. I find it rewarding. I also find it a little daunting, but I'm committed to it.
I have a question here.
So I agree that you should try to reach people at college age, but I think that it might be better to try to reach them even younger than that. I grew up here on Staten Island in the 60s and the 70s, and my step-grandparents were Muslim and Catholic, and my Methodist, and my mother went to a high school that at the time in Manhattan was called Little Yeshiva because it had a large population of, I think, German Jews that came in the late 1800s. So I was fortunate to grow up in this environment where some people would say I'm confused, but I actually thought it was very normal to be around people of different ethnic groups, different religious groups, and different backgrounds. And it has really been, it's been great because even though I have my own beliefs, it doesn't take away from what you believe in, whatever that might be, but it allows you to just see people as human beings first. And then it's sort of an aside that, oh, they happen to belong to this particular religious group. Oh, my grandparents' next door neighbor were Hindu Catholic families, so I was growing up in strange Staten Island, but it was a very good place to be.
My name is Maureen Karen. I'm curious, maybe this seems like a silly question, but why is there so much hatred against Islam and Muslims at this time in our history? Like, where is that stemming from?
It's also very historically deeply rooted. It has a historically deeply rooted explanation. Because of Orientalism. Orientalism is a field of knowledge that characterizes the other, who is the opposite of you, in very demeaning ways. So whenever political or military events happen, to the us, to the we, to the I, we translate those events into what we know about the other. So if it's bad things we know about the other, then that's all we're going to say about the other. For example, September 11th, the attacks of September 11th. People who don't know too much about Islam or Muslim civilization or history, they're easily predisposed to accept views that this is a Muslim problem. So they already essentialize or reduce or characterize Muslims as a certain thing, these certain vices. Whereas other people who are familiar with Muslims, they look at September 11th, the attacks, as, wow, this is an aberration of those people or that belief system. And so Orientalism, similar to anti-Semitism, because when I didn't really understand Orientalism until I studied anti-Semitism. Because anti-Semitism expresses itself academically, professionally, from a popular culture point of view, in art, especially Europe. The art in the 1930s Europe was despicable how they portrayed Jews. And so by understanding anti-Semitism and how it goes up and it goes down and how it expresses itself from different points of view is how I understood Islamophobia and how it expresses itself from different points of view. So there's an underlying ideology about the other which pops up when things like September 11th or the Gulf War or the war in Iraq or the Iranian Revolution and several other types of events, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And that's when those views pop up. So they're already present in a latent, sleep stage, but then they pop up as explanations for why things are happening the way they're happening. So, and for the present time, it's September 11th, which revived basically Orientalism under scholars like Bernard Lewis and an Arab scholar named Howald. So it's not racial, but it's an academic rising of a negative point of view about other people, initiated by an attack, basically.
I'm gonna defer mainly to Ghanim on this question, though I'll just say, we look for easy answers for complicated problems. So what's the easy answer? Well, it must be a religion or a people. But if you think about it, if we conceptualize it another way, why don't we think of this is a problem of young male violence? Right? By and large, the people who do this are young males, with a few exceptions. So, but we don't say, well, then everybody should be afraid of young males, right? Watch out for them, they're dangerous, they carry guns, they're lone wolves. I mean, just because of the way we've conceptualized the problem. And so, I think the more that we know about each other, and here I'm challenging all of us to try to learn more. Not to come to these groups is great, but we should also try to learn more about each other on our own time. It may not be, it's not the kind of learning that you get with a teacher, but teaching time is precious, and we need to do our homework. all of us.
It occurs to me that there are two major forces in the world that are exploiting people's maybe innate fears of the other, of what's unknown, and those are the media, because of course they put this stuff first and foremost all the time, 24 hours a day, before any other information in the world, and there's plenty of other information besides ISIS. So ISIS counts on that they're going to get media coverage for whatever they do. And of course then we have politicians, and the politicians from the beginning, say with the treatment of President Obama, have treated him as the other for two reasons. First, his middle name, and second is the fact that he's a man of color. So I think we have formidable forces to deal with, and I don't see how one deals with those kind of really huge forces kind of setting the stage for everything else.
I just want to briefly say that's interesting because from a sociological point of view, in communication theory, that's theories elaborating on how people communicate, what that means. They talk about how to be truncated into a system that depends upon sensationalism. But you know that saying, if it bleeds, it leads? That does two things. It shows us how communication is a business for profit, but it also shows elaborately how human psychology operates in society. So we are attracted to negative things, creates drama, creates conversation, motivates us in very negative ways. But not that many people are like, oh my God, did you hear about Kathy who fed the kitten? The kitten on the street? Was hungry, he was skinny, she fed. What do you want? CNN doesn't want to talk about that. Or more important issues that relate to good things people do. So there is a good news network too online. It's called Good News Network. It tries to do the opposite. So that, from your comment, what I'm seeing is two things. One, communication has become a business. Two, human psychology is always attracted to the negative. We need to change those two things. We need to seek communication that's positive to balance negative and positive. We need to change the way we think about what attracts us. What attracts us to violence? Why do action movies make the most money? And my movies don't. So we have to think about things about human psychology and work on it in ourselves, because there's something in the self that attracts us to these negative things that feeds into this business, this communication business. It's very complicated. I don't understand it myself. They do a lot more about understanding it. But it just, highlights two things about it.
I would say that we need to do a better job about teaching ourselves and our children how to have a critical mind when it comes to all that we read and hear, and to try to be resistant to all of these ideological appeals that are made to us in a variety of ways, and to recognize them. You see them every day in the news. I also think we live at a time, and I'm grateful for it, where despite the fact that the media, I'm not talking about like the major networks seem to be controlled by fewer and fewer people these days, but we have so many sources for news. And so we live at a time where one individual can become a journalist with a cell phone. And what we can do is we can expose ourselves to a variety of viewpoints, even though that is so countercultural today. I have a Facebook page, and I see something that irritates me because it's a message that I don't agree with. I can pull down my pull-down menu and say, I don't want to see this. And then eventually, over the course of over the years, I so limited myself in the messages that I receive. The only thing I see are the messages that agree with mine, and I'm reinforced in my belief. This is not the way. So we unfortunately have to expose ourselves to a variety of different viewpoints, but hopefully only after we have inculcated these critical thinking skills that allow us to recognize when we're being manipulated, when the information needs to be sifted for the truth.
Oh dear. Unfortunately, we are out of time. But let me me just say that I'm hoping the rabbi will be able to join us a little bit in the fellowship hall afterwards, and of course, Ghanim as well. And so join us, come back, have some coffee, grab these guys and ask them whatever you want to, okay? Thank you both so much. It's so good.